Long before the legend of Lilith, ancient civilizations feared a mysterious spirit called Lilitu, a dark wind demon whispered about in the oldest Mesopotamian myths. She was said to move through the night, unseen but powerful, haunting deserts, invading dreams, and bringing terror to those who slept unprotected. But who was Lilitu really? Was she a demon, a forgotten goddess, or the origin of one of history's most controversial myths? In today's video, we uncover the ancient story hidden in clay tablets and lost legends. If you enjoy dark mythology and forgotten history, thank you for watching and supporting the channel. The Whisper in the Wind, Origins of Lilitu. Long before empires rose and fell in the ancient Near East, the people of Mesopotamia lived in a world filled with visible power, kings, temples, armies, and invisible forces. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates gave life to cities, but they also brought floods, storms, and unpredictable change. To the early Sumerians and Akkadians, the natural world was not random. It was alive with spirits. Among those spirits was a mysterious being known as Lilitu. Her name comes from the ancient word lil, meaning wind or air. This detail is important. In Mesopotamian thought, wind was not just moving air, it was a spiritual force. It could bring cool relief during the heat of summer, but it could also arrive as a destructive storm. Wind was invisible, powerful, and uncontrollable. Lilitu embodied that same quality. The earliest references to beings like Lilitu appear in ancient Sumerian and Akkadian incantation texts. These clay tablets describe a group of night spirits, often referred to as Lilu, Lilitu, and Ardent Lily. They were believed to wander in the darkness, especially in deserted places far from cities and temples. Ruins, open deserts, and isolated roads were considered dangerous because they were outside the protection of the gods. Lilitu, in particular, became associated with the night. In ancient belief systems, the night was not simply the absence of sunlight. It was a realm of vulnerability. People slept, dreams occurred, and the boundary between the human and spirit worlds was thought to grow thinner. Without light, it was easier to imagine unseen forces moving quietly around homes. Some texts describe Lilitu as a being who could enter through cracks, windows, or open doors. She was connected to illness, bad dreams, and fear. In a world without modern medicine, unexplained sickness was often attributed to spiritual influence. When a child became ill or when nightmares disturbed sleep, protective rituals were performed to drive away night spirits like Lilitu. This does not mean Lilitu was universally viewed as pure evil. In Mesopotamian mythology, spirits often had complex roles. Some beings could bring both harm and blessing depending on context. However, over time, Lilitu became more strongly associated with danger. One reason for this shift may have been her connection to the wilderness. Ancient Mesopotamian culture valued civilization highly. Cities were organized, ruled by law, and protected by patron gods. Anything outside the city walls symbolized chaos. The desert, in particular, represented unpredictability and isolation. By linking Lilitu to these environments, storytellers reinforced the idea that she belonged to the untamed world. Some later interpretations describe Lilitu as having features that combine human and animal traits. Wings are sometimes mentioned in artistic reconstructions, symbolizing mobility between worlds. Wings also appear frequently in ancient Near Eastern art to represent divine or supernatural beings. In this context, wings would not automatically mean evil. They could signify power, speed, or spiritual presence. However, Lilitu's association with the night gradually shaped her reputation into something more threatening. Another important element of her mythology relates to dreams. Ancient cultures often believed dreams were messages from gods, or encounters with spirits. If a dream felt disturbing, seductive, or frightening, it could be interpreted as an attack or visit from a supernatural being. Lilitu's identity became closely tied to these nighttime experiences. In protective incantations, priests would recite prayers to defend against spirits like her. These rituals suggest that belief in Lilitu was widespread enough to require formal spiritual countermeasures. Families might use amulets, charms, or protective symbols to guard their homes. The existence of such precautions shows that Lilitu was not merely a story, but part of lived religious experience. It is important to understand that ancient myths often served practical purposes. They explained natural events, reinforced social order, and offered comfort during uncertainty. By giving the wind a name and personality, people could conceptualize danger in a manageable way. Instead of facing random fear, they could perform rituals and feel protected. Lilitu, therefore, may have begun as a symbolic representation of unseen forces, especially those related to storms, disease, and the vulnerabilities of the night. Over time, as cultures interacted through trade and conquest, stories evolved. Mesopotamian mythology influenced neighboring regions, and ideas traveled across languages. The concept of a night spirit associated with wind continued to appear in later traditions. While Lilitu's name changed in different contexts, her core characteristics remained recognizable: connection to darkness, movement through air, and association with danger during sleep. Some scholars suggest that Lilitu's transformation into later figures, such as Lilith in Jewish folklore, was the result of this long cultural exchange. However, in her earliest form, Lilitu stands as a distinct Mesopotamian spirit rooted in the ancient world's understanding of nature. What makes Lilitu especially fascinating is that she reflects a universal human experience: the fear of the unseen. Every culture has myths about night spirits, shadow beings, or wind entities. These stories appear independently around the world. They often share similar themes: vulnerability during sleep, danger in isolated places, and the power of invisible forces. Lilitu belongs to this broader tradition of myth-making. She was not just a demon in the modern sense of the word. The ancient concept of a demon differed from later religious interpretations. In Mesopotamia, spirits could be neutral, helpful, or harmful. They existed as part of a complex spiritual ecosystem. Lilitu's role was likely shaped by storytelling, ritual practice, and evolving religious thought. As centuries passed, her image became darker in some traditions, while remaining symbolic in others. The details of her appearance and behavior were shaped by the needs of each generation that retold her story. Today, Lilitu survives in fragments, ancient tablets, scholarly interpretations, and reconstructed myths. Yet her influence continues to spark curiosity. She represents one of the earliest recorded night spirits in human history, and her name echoes across thousands of years. Understanding Lilitu means stepping into the mindset of ancient Mesopotamia. It means recognizing how people explained wind, illness, dreams, and fear. It means seeing mythology not as simple fantasy, but as a reflection of cultural experience. The Burney relief, the Queen of the Night. One of the most mysterious artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia is a clay plaque known today as the Burney relief, often called the Queen of the Night. Discovered in southern Iraq and dated to around 1800 BCE, this remarkable artwork continues to spark debate among historians, archaeologists, and mythology enthusiasts. At first glance, the figure is both beautiful and intimidating. She stands front-facing, nude, with large wings extending from her shoulders. Her feet end in sharp bird-like talons, and she wears a horned crown, an ancient symbol of divine authority in Mesopotamian culture. She stands upon two powerful lions, and at her sides are two owls. The entire scene is carefully crafted, suggesting that the image represents a being of great importance. But who is she? That question remains one of the greatest mysteries of ancient Near Eastern art. Some scholars believe the figure represents a major goddess such as Ishtar, the deity associated with love, fertility, and war. Others argue she may depict Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. Still others suggest she could represent a composite deity, an artistic expression combining traits of multiple divine figures. Another theory proposes something even more intriguing, that the relief may be connected to the ancient night spirit known as Lilitu, later associated with Lilith. Although there is no direct inscription identifying the figure, several symbolic elements invite comparison with night-associated spirits. First, the wings. In Mesopotamian art, wings often symbolize divine power and supernatural movement between realms. Winged figures could travel between heaven, earth, and the underworld. The presence of wings suggests this figure exists beyond ordinary human boundaries. Second, the talons. Unlike typical representations of goddesses with human feet, this figure's lower body features bird-like claws. This detail emphasizes her connection to nature, predatory strength, and possibly the wilderness. In ancient symbolism, birds of prey often represented dominance, vision, and independence. Third, the owls. Owls were creatures of the night, associated with darkness and mystery. In many cultures, owls symbolized wisdom, but they were also linked to death and supernatural forces. Their placement beside the figure strengthens her connection to nocturnal symbolism. Fourth, the lions beneath her feet. Lions were powerful symbols of authority and protection in Mesopotamian art. A deity standing upon lions demonstrated control over chaos and primal forces. This imagery communicates dominance and divine status. Together, these features create a figure who is neither fully human nor fully animal, neither entirely earthly nor entirely celestial. The Burney relief is made from baked clay and was originally painted in vibrant colors. Traces suggest that the background may have been black or dark red, while the figure's skin and details were carefully highlighted. Today, only faint remnants of those colors remain, but modern reconstructions help us imagine how striking it must have appeared in an ancient temple or home. The plaque's exact purpose is also debated. Some researchers believe it was displayed in a private household, serving as both decoration and protection. Others think it may have been placed in a temple setting. Because similar reliefs have not survived, the artifact stands alone as a rare glimpse into Mesopotamian religious art. What makes the Burney relief especially fascinating is how it reflects the complexity of ancient belief systems. Modern audiences often think in terms of strict categories: gods are good, demons are evil. But in Mesopotamian culture, divine beings could embody multiple qualities at once. A goddess could bring fertility and destruction. A deity could protect a city while also unleashing storms or war. Power itself was neither purely good nor purely evil, it was simply power. If the figure represents a goddess like Ishtar, then she symbolizes both love and conflict. If she represents Ereshkigal, she embodies the mysteries of the underworld. If she is linked to Lilitu, then she may represent the untamed forces of the night and wilderness. Regardless of her identity, the relief captures something essential about ancient spirituality: the belief that divine forces operated in every aspect of life. Nighttime was not just darkness, it was a realm of activity. Dreams were not random, they were meaningful experiences. Storms were not weather patterns alone, they were expressions of divine will. The Burney relief visually communicates this worldview. Her frontal pose is especially significant. In many ancient cultures, front-facing figures were rare and powerful. A direct gaze symbolized confrontation and authority. She does not turn away from the viewer. Instead, she meets the gaze head-on, reinforcing her strength. Her nudity may also carry symbolic meaning. In Mesopotamian art, nudity could represent fertility, divinity, or sacred identity. It was not necessarily associated with shame or vulnerability. Instead, it highlighted the figure's connection to life forces and natural power. Because the artifact was found in modern times and eventually acquired by the British Museum, it became widely studied in the 20th century. Scholars named it the Burney relief after a previous owner. Its display in museums brought international attention to Mesopotamian art and sparked renewed interest in ancient mythology. Over time, popular culture began calling the figure the Queen of the Night, a name that reflects her mysterious aura. However, this title does not appear in ancient texts. It is a modern interpretation. This demonstrates how archaeological discoveries can influence mythology in new ways. When ancient images resurface, they often inspire reinterpretation. The Burney relief has contributed to discussions about female divinity, demonology, and the evolution of myth. Some modern writers associate the figure with Lilith because of shared symbolic traits, wings, nocturnal themes, and association with wild spaces. Yet it is important to note that direct evidence linking the relief to Lilitu or Lilith remains unproven. The identification is speculative, though intriguing. What is certain is that the artifact reveals how ancient artists portrayed supernatural beings, not as monstrous caricatures, but as majestic and complex figures. The Burney relief stands as a reminder that ancient mythology was rich, layered, and deeply symbolic. It reflects a civilization that saw the world as interconnected with divine forces. Whether goddess or spirit, protector or night entity, the figure commands attention. Her image endures not because we fully understand her, but because we do not. The mystery is what keeps her alive in modern imagination. And as we move deeper into Lilitu's story, we begin to see how such images may have shaped later legends, transforming ancient wine spirits into one of the most famous figures in religious folklore. In the next chapter, we will explore how Lilitu's identity evolved across cultures and centuries, eventually becoming the legend known as Lilith. From Lilitu to Lilith. The transformation from Lilitu to Lilith is one of the most fascinating journeys in ancient mythology. What began as a Mesopotamian night spirit gradually evolved into one of the most debated figures in religious folklore. This change did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly across centuries, shaped by cultural exchange, language shifts, and evolving spiritual beliefs. In early Mesopotamian texts, Lilitu was associated with wind, storms, and the dangers of the night. She was part of a group of spirits connected to the air, beings believed to roam freely between the human world and the unseen realm. These spirits were not always described in fully developed mythological narratives. Instead, they appeared in protective spells and incantations, suggesting that people feared their influence and sought protection from them. As civilizations changed and new religious traditions emerged, older myths were not erased. They were adapted. When Hebrew-speaking communities came into contact with Mesopotamian culture, many ideas traveled between regions. Trade, conquest, and migration helped spread stories. Over time, the name Lilitu appears to have influenced the Hebrew term Lilith, which is mentioned briefly in ancient scripture. In the prophetic book of Isaiah, a creature associated with desolation and wilderness is referenced in a poetic description of a ruined land. While interpretations vary, many scholars believe this figure may reflect the lingering memory of earlier wind spirits. However, the most dramatic development of Lilitu's story occurred much later in Jewish folklore. During the medieval period, particularly between the 8th and 13th centuries, new interpretations of older traditions began to appear. One of the most famous sources is a text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. This work presents a detailed narrative about Lilith that does not appear in earlier scripture. According to this story, Lilith was created at the same time and from the same earth as Adam, making her equal in origin. This detail is extremely important. Unlike later versions of the creation story, where woman is formed from man, this tradition suggests equality from the beginning. Conflict arises when Adam attempts to assert dominance. Lilith refuses to accept a subordinate role. She argues that since both were created from the same ground, neither should rule over the other. The disagreement escalates. Rather than submit, Lilith speaks the divine name and leaves the Garden of Eden. She chooses exile over obedience. This decision becomes the turning point in her mythological transformation. In the story, Lilith flees to the Red Sea, a location often associated in ancient literature with chaos and wilderness. There, she encounters other spirits and is said to join forces with them. This detail may symbolize her transition from a wind spirit into a more defined demon figure within folklore. The tale continues with 3 angels sent to persuade her to return. When Lilith refuses, a compromise is offered. If she does not return, she will be limited in her power to harm newborn children. In some versions, she is forced to swear an oath. This element of the story likely reflects protective traditions used by families who feared infant illness or sudden death. The narrative served both spiritual and social purposes. It provided an explanation for unexplained tragedies, while also reinforcing religious boundaries about order and obedience. Over time, Lilith's character gained additional layers in mystical literature. In texts associated with early Jewish mysticism, she is sometimes portrayed as a powerful being aligned with darker forces. These writings describe a cosmic balance between forces of order and chaos. Lilith becomes linked with temptation, night imagery, and the concept of uncontrolled desire. In these interpretations, she is not merely a wandering spirit. She becomes a symbol of opposition to divine structure. Yet it is important to understand that mythology often reflects cultural values. In ancient Mesopotamia, Lilitu represented the unpredictability of wind and wilderness. In medieval Jewish folklore, Lilith represented deeper themes, questions about authority, independence, and cosmic harmony. Each culture reshaped the figure according to its worldview. The shift from Lilitu to Lilith also demonstrates how oral tradition influences written tradition. Stories passed verbally for generations can change slightly with each retelling. A spirit of the air can become a night demon. A protective incantation figure can become a central character in a moral narrative. Another factor in this transformation was the symbolic language of the ancient world. Birds, wings, and nocturnal creatures were common symbols in Near Eastern art. These images could represent freedom, danger, divine power, or spiritual mobility. When later storytellers described Lilith with wings, they may have drawn upon these long-standing symbolic traditions. The evolution of her image continued in medieval manuscripts, where artists depicted her as a winged woman, sometimes with serpent imagery, sometimes surrounded by darkness. These illustrations helped cement her identity as a demon figure in the popular imagination. However, modern scholarship often emphasizes that Lilith's story is complex and layered. She may have originated as a wind spirit in Mesopotamian belief systems, later merged with other night-related symbols, and eventually became part of religious folklore in a narrative shaped by theological concerns. In this sense, Lilith is not just a single character. She is a historical example of how myths evolve across time. The journey from Lilitu to Lilith shows how language changes meaning. It demonstrates how societies reinterpret older traditions. It highlights how fear, symbolism, and storytelling combine to create lasting legends. Today, Lilith appears in literature, art, psychology, and modern cultural discussions. Some view her as a symbol of rebellion. Others see her as a mythological cautionary tale. Still others study her as an example of ancient cross-cultural exchange. What remains consistent is her association with the night, independence, and transformation. From the winds of Mesopotamia to medieval folklore, her story reflects humanity's ongoing effort to understand the unknown. Lilitu may have begun as a spirit carried by the air. But through centuries of storytelling, she became Lilith, the figure who refused to disappear. And that transformation ensures her legend continues to inspire curiosity, debate, and imagination even today. The Demon Queen of the Night. As Lilitu's legend moved through centuries of storytelling, translation, and religious interpretation, her identity transformed. What began as a mysterious wind spirit in ancient Mesopotamia gradually evolved into one of the most powerful and feared figures in medieval folklore, the Demon Queen of the Night. This transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, shaped by cultural exchange, theological debate, and the human imagination. By the Middle Ages, Lilitu's name had evolved into Lilith, and her character had expanded far beyond a simple night spirit. In Jewish mystical tradition, especially in texts associated with Kabbalah, Lilith was described as a powerful supernatural being who ruled over dark forces and operated at the edges of the spiritual world. She was no longer just a wandering presence in the wind. She had become a figure with influence, authority, and a structured role within mythic cosmology. In these traditions, Lilith was sometimes portrayed as the companion of Samhael, a being associated with judgment, severity, and destruction. Together, they were imagined as ruling over realms of impurity and chaos. This pairing reflected a broader symbolic system in medieval thought, where balance between forces of light and darkness structured the universe. Lilith's imagery also grew more elaborate during this period. Artists and scribes described her with dark wings, long flowing hair, and a commanding presence. These wings symbolized her ability to move between worlds, crossing from hidden realms into the human sphere. Unlike angels who served divine order, Lilith's movement represented independence and rebellion. One of the most persistent themes in her mythology was her connection to the night. In ancient and medieval thought, night was a time of vulnerability. Darkness concealed threats, and sleep left humans defenseless. Before modern science explained sleep disorders, dreams, and psychological phenomena, people often attributed unexplained experiences to supernatural causes. Lilith became closely associated with these nocturnal fears. She was said to visit sleeping individuals, particularly men, appearing in dreams as a beautiful yet dangerous figure. These encounters were believed to cause temptation, anxiety, or even physical weakness. In some interpretations, she symbolized uncontrolled desire or disruptive impulses, forces that challenged social norms. Her association with infants also grew stronger in later folklore. Stories warned that Lilith could harm newborn children if left unprotected. Because infant mortality was tragically common in pre-modern societies, communities developed rituals and protective symbols to guard against unseen threats. Amulets inscribed with angelic names were placed near cradles. Protective inscriptions were hung in homes. These practices reveal something important: mythology often reflects real human concerns. Lilith's legend may have served as a way to express anxiety about childbirth, survival, and the fragility of early life. In mystical writings, Lilith was sometimes described as leading groups of lesser night spirits. These beings were believed to roam in the darkness, representing disorder and instability. Through this framework, Lilith became a central figure in a broader mythological system, a queen presiding over forces outside divine harmony. However, it is important to understand that these descriptions developed over time. Early Mesopotamian texts referring to Lilitu do not present her in the fully developed form found in medieval sources. Instead, they describe a category of wind spirits associated with night and wilderness. The later demon queen image reflects centuries of reinterpretation. As religious thought evolved, Lilith's character absorbed symbolic meanings. She began to represent themes such as independence versus authority, wilderness versus civilization, night versus daylight, chaos versus order. In some interpretations, her refusal to submit in later folklore symbolized resistance to hierarchy. This aspect of her legend, particularly the story of her departure from Eden, became influential in modern discussions about autonomy and equality. But within medieval belief systems, Lilith was primarily understood as a dangerous supernatural entity. Her power was not seen as symbolic freedom, but as a threat to spiritual balance. Ritual texts often included prayers asking for protection from her influence. Interestingly, the fear surrounding Lilith also demonstrates how mythology can adapt to changing social structures. As societies became more centralized and religious institutions more formalized, figures like Lilith were integrated into complex cosmologies that explained good and evil in structured terms. Lilith's transformation into the Queen of the Night reflects this shift. She became part of a dualistic worldview, representing the shadow side of existence. Yet even in this role, she retained traces of her earlier identity as a wind spirit. Her ability to move unseen, her connection to night air, and her presence in wilderness settings all echo her ancient origins. The endurance of her myth across millennia is remarkable. Few ancient spirits maintained relevance through so many cultural transitions. From Mesopotamian clay tablets to medieval manuscripts, Lilitu's story adapted while preserving core elements of mystery and power. Today, historians study her legend not as literal belief, but as a window into ancient psychology and cultural development. Lilitu/Lilith represents how early societies interpreted natural phenomena, social tensions, and existential fears through myth. Her image as the demon queen of the night may be dramatic, but it reflects humanity's long tradition of storytelling. Through myth, communities expressed ideas about independence, danger, morality, and survival. Whether viewed as a demon, a symbol, or a cultural archetype, Lilitu's journey from wind spirit to night queen illustrates the evolution of legend across civilizations. And as we move forward in this exploration, we will see how her story continued to influence literature, art, and modern imagination, proving that even the oldest myths can remain alive in new forms. The Queen of the Night still stands in the shadows of history, reminding us that every legend begins with a whisper in the wind. So after thousands of years, one question remains: was Lilitu truly a demon of darkness, or was she humanity's way of explaining the unseen forces of the night? From ancient Mesopotamian wind spirits to the later legend of Lilith, her story shows how myths evolve, transform, and survive across civilizations. Lilitu's whisper still echoes through history, reminding us how ancient fears can become timeless legends. If you enjoyed this journey into forgotten mythology, thank you for watching, liking, and supporting the channel. Your support helps us uncover more hidden stories from the ancient world. Stay curious, and see you in the next video.